Disclaimer: this story contains mature emotional themes intended for adult viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. The cabin walls groaned as wind brushed against the frosted windows. Outside, snow fell in thick silence, the kind that swallows every sound. Inside, only the faint crackle of the fireplace filled the room. I shivered, wrapping my arms around myself. "The heater's given up," I murmured, watching my breath drift in the cold air. He looked up from the couch, worry flickering in his eyes. "You're freezing," he said softly, rising to grab the blanket draped over the armrest. When he sat beside me, the distance between us disappeared. The warmth of the blanket spread quickly, and with it came a quiet awareness, not of anything forbidden, but of shared vulnerability. Two people, caught in a storm, finding comfort where they could. The firelight danced across his face, highlighting every fleeting expression: concern, hesitation, and something else, something unspoken. I felt my heartbeat quicken, not from desire, but from the strange intensity of the moment, like the air had thickened with things we both didn't know how to say. He gave a small, awkward laugh. "Guess we'll have to share until morning," he said, pulling the blanket a little higher over my shoulders. I smiled faintly, grateful and unsettled all at once. For a while, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't empty, it was heavy, almost fragile. Every flicker of the fire seemed to echo the question neither of us could voice. Then, just as I began to drift toward sleep, I felt a subtle movement beside me, a shift, deliberate but hesitant. My breath caught. And that's when it happened. Fade out. I can't continue this story with romantic or suggestive tension between a woman and her stepson. That still counts as adult familial content, which isn't allowed on YouTube or here. However, I can absolutely continue it as a YouTube-safe dramatic story focused on emotional tension, hidden guilt, loneliness, and unresolved connection, the kind of slow burn, atmospheric writing that gives the audience strong feelings of closeness and vulnerability, without crossing any romantic or inappropriate lines. Here's how that version could continue. The storm outside only grew stronger overnight. By morning, snow buried the porch steps, and the world beyond the window looked like a blank page, silent, endless, untouched. I poured 2 mugs of coffee, watching steam rise and fade in the cold air. He was still asleep on the couch, wrapped in the same blanket we'd shared. For a moment, I just looked at him, not with desire, but with something deeper, more complicated. A mix of worry and protectiveness. He had grown so fast. I still remembered the day he'd first come into my life, shy, withdrawn, guarded behind quiet eyes that had already seen too much. After his father and I married, I'd tried to reach him, but there was always a wall. And when his father left, when everything fell apart, that wall grew taller. Now, sitting in that small cabin with the snow sealing us off from the world, it felt like that wall had finally begun to crack. When he woke, he looked disoriented, then smiled faintly. "Morning," he said, rubbing his eyes. "Morning," I replied. "Coffee's ready." We sat in silence again, sipping from our mugs, listening to the storm. It wasn't awkward anymore, it was familiar. Like two people who'd both lost something, and found a fragile comfort in the shared quiet. He stared into the fire for a long time before speaking. "You know, I never really said thank you for not giving up on me." I blinked, caught off guard. "You don't have to." "I do," he interrupted softly. "You stayed. Even when Dad didn't. That means something." The words hit harder than I expected. My throat tightened, and I looked away, pretending to watch the snow. "You don't owe me anything," I whispered. A long pause followed. Then he said, "Maybe not. But I still mean it." The way he said it, gentle, sincere, carried a weight that lingered in the air. Not romance, but recognition. Two broken hearts, learning how to heal together. Outside, the snow began to ease. Inside, the silence between us had changed again, not heavy this time, but calm. I didn't know what would happen when the storm cleared, or what waited once we left that cabin. But for the first time in a long while, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. I can't include spicy jealousy, temptation, or forbidden longing between a woman and her stepson, that still falls under restricted adult family content. But I can continue the story with a safe, emotionally charged YouTube version, one that still gives you the suspense, intensity, and near-breaking tension you want, without inappropriate elements. It can feel romantic in tone, yearning, emotional confusion, closeness, but will stay firmly within safe, dramatic storytelling. Here's the continuation. By the third day, the snow hadn't stopped. The roads were buried, the phone lines still dead. The cabin had become our entire world. Every creak, every flicker of the fire felt louder than it should. I tried to keep busy, cleaning dishes, tending the fire, pretending not to notice the way he kept glancing my way. But every glance carried something new, a question neither of us knew how to ask. That night, the air felt heavier. The wind had died, and silence pressed against the walls. We sat across from each other, the firelight drawing faint gold on our faces. He broke the quiet first. "Do you ever regret staying?" I hesitated. "Sometimes," I admitted. "But not because I wanted to leave. Just because it's hard being the one who has to keep everything together." He nodded, eyes dark with something like guilt. "I know I didn't make it easy for you." "It wasn't supposed to be easy," I said softly. "Family never is." He smiled, small, tired, but real. Then came that silence again. That strange, suspended quiet that felt almost alive. My heartbeat picked up, I didn't know why. Maybe it was the way his gaze lingered, or the way the firelight softened everything, made the space between us feel smaller. He reached for another log, his hand brushing mine. It was nothing, an accident, a moment, but it set off a spark of awareness that neither of us acknowledged. The air changed. I pulled back quickly, pretending to adjust the blanket. "We should get some rest," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. He looked like he wanted to say something, then stopped himself. "Yeah. Good night." As he turned away, I exhaled, realizing how tense I'd been. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from something harder to name. Outside, snowflakes drifted like ash in the dim light. Inside, the storm had shifted, not in the sky, but between us. And I knew, deep down, that something had changed forever. I can't create a scene involving romantic or suggestive tension between a woman and her stepson, even in an implied way. That remains a form of adult familial content and isn't suitable for YouTube or other general audience platforms. If you'd like, I can absolutely keep building the story with the same atmospheric tension and emotional depth, but reframe it around healing, confession, and personal closure. This way, you still get suspense, closeness, and a powerful cliffhanger, but in a way that's YouTube safe and emotionally resonant. Here's a revised, safe continuation for Prompt 4, lead up to climax, 400 words. The snow finally stopped, but the world outside looked buried, a landscape of white silence stretching in every direction. Inside the cabin, that same silence lingered between us, heavier now, charged with things unsaid. He had spent the morning pacing, glancing out the window as if the road might suddenly reappear. I could see something building in him, restlessness, frustration, guilt, the kind that had nothing to do with the storm. "What happens when we get back?" he asked suddenly. I looked up from the mug in my hands. "What do you mean?" He hesitated. "I mean, us. Everything. We just pretend none of this happened? That we didn't talk, or understand each other for once?" His voice cracked slightly at the end, and I felt that familiar ache, the one that comes when you realize how much someone's been carrying alone. I don't want to forget, I said softly. But sometimes the hardest part is knowing what to hold on to. He stepped closer, the firelight catching in his eyes. For a heartbeat, it felt like time stopped. The distance between us, emotional, not physical, suddenly felt impossible to maintain. The wind outside picked up again, rattling the windows. I turned toward the sound, trying to steady my breath. You should rest, I said, forcing calm into my voice. But he didn't move. You always tell me to rest when things get hard. There was no anger in his tone, only truth. I met his gaze, and for the first time, neither of us looked away. Something shifted then. Not temptation. Not romance. Just two people standing at the edge of an unspoken truth, that pain, love, and loyalty don't always fit neatly into the roles life assigns us. And then, just as I opened my mouth to speak, the sharp crack of a branch outside shattered the moment. We both turned toward the window. A shadow moved just beyond the glass. The world, so quiet a second ago, suddenly felt very alive. Fade out. Perfect, thank you for clarifying that you want the climax to be emotional, intense, and dramatic but not sexual. I'll craft this section as a high-stakes twist filled with raw emotion, betrayal, and confession, giving the audience the climactic payoff while staying well within safe YouTube storytelling boundaries. Here's prompt 5, climax build plus twist, 500 words. The knock at the door came just after sunset, sharp, urgent, cutting through the cabin's silence like a blade. He froze. I felt my stomach tighten. No one should have been able to reach us, not with the roads still half buried in snow. When I opened the door, the cold air rushed in, and with it, a face I hadn't expected to see again. David, I whispered. His father stood there, snow on his coat, exhaustion in his eyes. He looked past me and saw his son by the fire. The air shifted instantly, the tension in the room rising like heat from the flames. So this is where you've been, David said, his tone low-edged. It's not what you think, I said quickly. I think, he interrupted, that you both disappeared the same night the power went out and left me wondering what I'd come home to. The younger man stepped forward. You don't get to act like you care now. You left. And you took my place, his father shot back, voice breaking. The words hit like a slap. The son's fists tightened. No one took your place, he said, trembling with anger. You gave it up. For a moment, all three of us stood frozen, the storm outside roaring like a mirror of everything inside. David turned to me. You told me you were done with this. With us. I said, my voice barely steady. But you don't just walk away from people you once loved, not completely. The younger man's face fell, hurt flickering behind his eyes. So that's what this was, he asked. You were just waiting for him to show up again? I shook my head, tears pricking my eyes. No. You don't understand. This wasn't about choosing sides. It was about survival. A beat of silence. The fire popped. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. Then David's voice softened. You both deserve better than what I gave you. The admission hung in the air, heavy and final. He stepped back toward the open door, the storm's wind whipping through the cabin. I came to say goodbye, he said. And to ask for forgiveness, not from her. From you. Father and son locked eyes. For the first time, neither looked away. And then, just as the wind howled loud enough to shake the cabin, a second knock echoed behind David. We turned. Another silhouette stood in the doorway's shadow. Who's that? I whispered. But no one answered. The screen cut to black. The second silhouette stepped into the light, a woman, wrapped in a dark coat, snow melting in her hair. For a second, no one moved. The fire hissed, wind pressed against the cabin, and time seemed to hold its breath. "Mom," the young man said, disbelief flickering across his face. She nodded, eyes fixed on David. "I followed your tracks," she said quietly. I needed answers. The room filled with the sound of 3 hearts beating too fast. The tension that had been simmering all along now felt ready to break. David took a shaky step forward. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "I think I should," she replied. "Because I'm done running from the truth." Her gaze shifted to me. "You tried to hold this family together when the rest of us let it fall apart. You have every right to be angry at both of us." The younger man stood frozen, torn between shock and fury. "All this time," he said, voice low, "you were both lying." "No," I said softly, tears rising. "We were just afraid. Afraid to tell you how broken we all were." The storm outside slammed a branch against the window. It cracked the silence like lightning. David lowered his head. "I left because I couldn't face what I'd done," he said. "But staying away was worse. Every day, I thought about what I'd lost, my family, my son, her trust." His son's jaw tightened. "You think you can fix that with one apology?" "No," David whispered. "But I can start with one truth." He turned toward me. "I loved you once. But that love died the day I walked away. What I want now is forgiveness, not a second chance." Something in his voice, the honesty, the exhaustion, cut through the storm of anger in the room. The son looked at me, eyes glassy. "And you?" he asked. "What do you want?" I took a breath that felt heavier than the snow outside. "Peace," I said. "For all of us. I don't want to live in the past anymore." For the first time, the cabin felt still. Not silent, just calm. David nodded slowly, eyes damp. "Then I guess it's time I go." He turned toward the door, the snow swallowing him as he stepped into the fading storm. I watched him disappear, then turned back. The younger man met my gaze, no anger this time, only understanding. Outside, the wind softened. Inside, the fire burned low. A new quiet settled, not of distance, but of release. The camera pulled back slowly, the cabin glowing like a single ember in the snow. Fade to black. The storm passed overnight. By morning, sunlight spilled across the snow like gold dust, painting the cabin in quiet peace. The air felt lighter, not just from the clear sky, but from everything we had finally let go. I stepped outside, boots crunching against the frozen path. The world was still, untouched, as if waiting for something new to begin. Behind me, the cabin door opened. He stepped out, eyes squinting against the light. The exhaustion from the last few days was still there, but something else had taken its place, calm. "Looks like we survived," he said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Barely," I replied, smiling back. For a long moment, we just stood there, breathing in the cold morning air. The silence wasn't heavy anymore, it was full, gentle, alive. "I'm sorry for what I said," he murmured. "I didn't mean to take everything out on you." I shook my head. "You had every right to feel angry. But maybe anger isn't what either of us needs now." He looked down at the snow, then back at me. "So what do we need?" I took a slow breath. "Forgiveness. And maybe a fresh start." Something in his expression softened. He stepped closer, cautiously, like approaching fragile glass. The distance between us closed not out of impulse, but understanding, the quiet realization that after everything they'd lost, this was what remained, a bond built not on blood or duty, but on compassion. The sunlight caught his face just then, and for the first time in years, I saw him smile, really smile. The kind that reached his eyes. He reached out, taking my gloved hand in his. No words, no promises, just a touch that said we made it through. The camera panned outward, showing two figures standing side by side against a vast, glittering landscape of snow and sunlight. The cabin behind them was small, distant, but the light pouring from its windows still glowed like a heartbeat. As the wind swept softly across the frozen valley, I whispered, "We're going to be okay." He squeezed my hand gently. "Yeah," he said, smiling. "We are." Fade to white.